I'm broken, you've thought it, maybe said it, maybe only to yourself in the private version of things, but said it nonetheless. That specific sentence, or some version of it, that arrived when you were looking at the pattern of your life and couldn't find a more generous explanation. I'm broken, not as a drama, not as a bid for attention, as what felt like the honest conclusion of an honest assessment. You looked at the evidence, the relationships that keep going the same way, the patterns you can't seem to break, the specific ways you keep falling short of the version of yourself you're trying to be, and the most accurate seeming explanation was something wrong at the level of what you are. I want to tell you something about that conclusion. It's understandable, it's arrived at logically from the available evidence, and it's wrong. Not wrong in the way that untrue things are wrong, the conclusion follows from the evidence, and the evidence is real. But the evidence is being interpreted through a framework that misses the most important part of what's actually happening. And the framework, once you can see it clearly, changes the conclusion entirely. That's what I want to do. Not reassure you out of it. Walk you through why the evidence points somewhere different than where you've been pointing it. Let me start with what broken actually means, because I think the word gets used without examining what it actually implies. Broken means something is wrong at the level of structure, at the level of what a thing fundamentally is. A broken object can't perform its function not because it's tired or because the conditions aren't right, but because something at its core has been damaged in a way that prevents it from working correctly. And when you say I'm broken, that's what you're claiming. That the problem isn't circumstantial or behavioral, or the result of things that happen to you, that it's structural, inherent, built into what you are at a level that can't be changed by effort or time or understanding. That's a very specific claim, and it's a claim that the evidence doesn't actually support. Not because the evidence isn't real. Your patterns are real, your struggles are real, the ways you keep arriving at places you didn't want to be are real. But real patterns and real struggles don't automatically indicate structural damage. They often indicate something much more ordinary and much more addressable. They indicate learning, specifically learning that happened in conditions that shaped you in ways that are now causing problems in different conditions. Broken implies you are made wrong. Patterned by difficult circumstances implies you are made fine and then shaped by things that weren't fine. Those are different things, and only one of them is actually accurate. Here's what I think happened. Not to explain it away, to give it a more accurate framework. You learned things early and repeatedly in the specific environment you grew up in and the specific relationships you moved through. You learned what love looks like and how it behaves. You learned what to expect from people and how to read situations and what the safe move is when something feels threatening. You learned how to manage your own emotional experience in ways that minimize the cost of having it. Those learnings were adaptations. They made sense in the context where they developed. They were in many cases genuinely protective. They kept you functioning in environments that required a specific kind of management to navigate. But the environment's changed. You're not in the original context anymore. The people and circumstances that required those specific adaptations are in the past. And the learnings, the patterns, the responses, the automatic behaviors, they don't know that. They're still running, still doing the job they were trained to do, still protecting you from things that are no longer present while creating friction in the environments that are. That's not brokenness, that's a software problem. Old code running in a new environment, the code made perfect sense for what it was written for. It just hasn't been updated. And old code can be updated. That's the whole thing. It takes time and it's uncomfortable, and it doesn't happen linearly, and sometimes you think you fixed something and then it shows up again in a slightly different form. But it can change, because it was never structural, it was always learned, and what was learned can be unlearned. I want to name some of the specific evidence that gets cited for being broken, because I think when it's examined specifically, the structural damage explanation starts to look less convincing. The pattern of relationships. You keep ending up in the same place with different people in different circumstances, but in recognizably similar dynamics. And you look at that pattern and you see yourself as the common variable, and you conclude that the problem must be you at some fundamental level. But patterns in relationships don't indicate brokenness. They indicate a template. A specific learned template for what love looks like and how relationships work that you've been applying, not consciously, not by choice, but automatically, across different people and circumstances. The template was written by your early experiences. It's been producing consistent results, because templates consistently produce results. That's what templates do. Changing the template is possible. Not easy. The template is established, and changing it requires working with it consciously, rather than just running it automatically, but possible. People change relationship patterns all the time, not by being not broken, but by doing the specific work of understanding the template and building a different one. The inability to sustain certain things. The things you try to do, the changes you attempted to make, the ways you've tried to show up differently that haven't stuck. You try for a while, and then you're back where you were. And you take this as evidence that you're fundamentally unable to change, fundamentally set in the ways that are costing you. But the inability to sustain change is not evidence of being unfixable. It's evidence of approaching change in a way that doesn't work for how change actually works. Most sustained change doesn't come from deciding to be different and then being different through willpower. It comes from changing the conditions and the support structures and the underlying beliefs that make the old behavior make sense. When the conditions are wrong, change doesn't stick. Not because you're broken, because the conditions are wrong. The ways you've hurt people, the things you've done in relationships that you're not proud of, the moments you were the version of yourself you didn't want to be. The damage that happened to others, to connections that mattered, to things that were good before you got your patterns on them. This is the evidence that's hardest to argue with, because it feels most like proof. Not just that things went wrong for you, but that you caused things to go wrong. That the brokenness has cost other people things, not just you. But making mistakes, even significant ones, even ones that hurt people, is not the same as being broken. It's being human. Every person who has ever loved anyone has hurt them in some way. Every person who has patterns has enacted those patterns on people who didn't deserve to be in them. The specific ways you've fallen short are real, and they matter and they deserve acknowledgement. They just don't add up to structural damage. They add up to a person who had difficult things to navigate and didn't always navigate them well, which is the description of every human being who has ever existed. Let me talk about the function that the I'm broken conclusion serves, because I think it's not random that people arrive there, and understanding the function helps you understand why it's so sticky. The broken conclusion is, in a strange way, a relief. It sounds like the opposite of that. It sounds like the harshest possible verdict. But there's a specific kind of relief in a conclusion that is final, and an explanation that closes the question. In not having to keep trying to figure out what's wrong and how to fix it, because you've already arrived at the answer. Nothing can be fixed. This is just how you are. Hope is exhausting. The project of trying to change, of working at patterns, of attempting different approaches, of making progress and then losing it and having to make it again, is genuinely hard work. And when the work keeps not producing the results you wanted, there's an exhaustion to the trying that makes the stopping feel like a mercy. And the broken conclusion makes stopping feel justified. If you're broken, then the effort was always going to be insufficient. If you're broken, then giving up isn't giving up. It's realism. If you're broken, then the past failures weren't failures. They were just the inevitable result of the structural problem that no amount of effort was ever going to fix. The broken conclusion protects you from hope. And sometimes when you've been hurt by hope enough times, protection from it feels like the kinder option. But hope is not actually the thing that was hurting you. The broken conclusion is. Because the broken conclusion forecloses the actual possibilities, not the hopeful imaginary possibilities, the real, specific, actually available ones. The possibility of understanding the pattern well enough to interrupt it. The possibility of doing the work in a different way that produces different results. The possibility of being in a relationship with someone whose specific presence makes the template less automatic. The possibility that the version of yourself you've been trying to become is not a fantasy but a direction. The broken conclusion closes all of those possibilities, not because they aren't available, because the conclusion decided they weren't before examining them. I want to say something about the difference between being broken and being in pain, because I think they get conflated in a way that matters. Being in pain, real significant sustained pain, produces a quality of experience that feels a lot like brokenness from the inside, the inability to function at full capacity, the recurring patterns, the sense of being stuck in something you can't get out of. The specific exhaustion of having been working on something for a long time and still being in a version of the same place, those things are real, and they feel like damage. But pain is not the same as damage. Pain is the appropriate response to something that has been hard. Damage would be if the hard thing left something permanently altered at the structural level. Pain means the hard things mattered and your system registered them. Damage means the system itself is now fundamentally compromised. Most of what people call brokenness is the first thing, not the second. Real pain, significant pain. Pain that has been present long enough and at sufficient intensity that it has organized itself into patterns and behaviors that look from the outside and the inside, like something is wrong at the level of what you are. But the source is pain, not damage. And pain, with the right conditions, the right support, the right work, the right amount of time and honesty, moves. It doesn't move on your timetable or in a straight line, but it moves. Here's what changing the story from I'm broken to I'm in pain with patterns I can understand. And change actually requires being honest about what the patterns are. Not in a shaming way, in a clear-eyed, this is what I actually do. The specific behaviors, the specific templates, the specific ways you respond in specific circumstances. Named clearly, without the softening or the excuse-making, but also without the catastrophizing. Just, this is what I do, this is when I do it, this is what seems to set it off. It requires understanding where they came from, which is uncomfortable because understanding the origin requires revisiting things you'd rather not revisit. The specific experiences that wrote the template, the specific relationships and circumstances that produced the adaptations. Not to excuse the pattern, to understand it, because understanding it is what allows you to work with it rather than just trying to overpower it. It requires doing different things in the specific moments when the old pattern wants to run. Which is the hardest part? Because the pattern runs automatically, and the moments when it wants to run are usually the moments when you're most activated and least capable of making conscious choices. It requires the slow, frustrating, repeatedly failing and trying again work of catching yourself in the pattern and making a different choice. Not always, not even most of the time at first. Just sometimes. Just enough to prove to yourself that a different choice exists, and it requires, this is the part people most want to skip, it requires some form of genuine support. A person, a practice, a professional, something that provides the specific conditions in which the pattern can be understood and changed. Because patterns as established were developed in relationship, and they change most reliably in relationship. You need something more than your own internal processing to work with something this ingrained. You're not broken. I know that sentence still might not reach the place the conclusion is living. I know you've heard it before and it didn't change the feeling. The feeling is persistent and the evidence it cites is real, and a simple assertion that you're not broken isn't going to displace it. But here's what I want you to hold, not as a certainty, as a possibility worth examining. What if the conclusion is wrong? Not completely. The pain is real, the patterns are real, the ways things have gone are real, but wrong about what the evidence means. Wrong about whether the evidence adds up to structural damage or to something more ordinary and more addressable. What if you're not broken? What if you're someone who learned things that don't serve you anymore? Who adapted to difficult circumstances in ways that are now causing friction in better ones? Who has been carrying things without enough support for long enough that the weight has started to look like damage? That version is harder to accept in one way. It means there's work to do rather than just a verdict to accept. It means the trying is still required. It means hope is still on the table, which means hope can still hurt. But it's also the version in which change is possible, in which the pattern isn't permanent, in which the version of yourself you keep working toward is not a fantasy but a real direction you can move in. You're not broken. You're in the middle of something hard that has been hard for a long time, and that is not the same thing, not even close. And somewhere underneath the conclusion, underneath the exhaustion of the trying and the weight of the pattern and the specific defeated feeling of being here again, you already know that. You just needed someone to say it who wasn't going to immediately follow it with something hollow. So here it is without the hollow part, you're not broken. You never were. The evidence just needed a better explanation. And this is it. This one is going to be uncomfortable. Not because I'm going to be cruel about it. Not because I think you're a bad person or that you deserve to hurt more than you already do. But because I think you've been telling yourself a story about what happened. A very comfortable, very sympathetic, very well-constructed story. And I think that story is costing you more than the heartbreak itself. And I'd rather say the hard thing than watch you carry a version of events that keeps you stuck. So, here it is. Some of what happened was your fault. Not all of it, maybe not even most of it, but some of it. A real, significant, honest sum. And you know that. Somewhere underneath the narrative you've been running, underneath the anger and the grief and the very reasonable pain, you know that you had a hand in this. You know there were things you did or didn't do, patterns you ran, moments where you chose the comfortable thing over the right thing, and that those choices contributed to the ending. And instead of sitting with that, you've been covering it, building a story around the parts that make you the injured party, collecting evidence for the version where this was done to you, not participated in by you. I understand why. I really do. Grief is hard enough without also having to hold accountability for it. When something ends and it hurts this much, the last thing you want to do is look at your own role in the wreckage. But the coping, the stories, the justifications, the careful editing of memory, that's not protecting you. That's just delaying the thing that would actually help. Let me tell you what the coping sounds like. Because I think a lot of us do this without fully recognizing it as what it is. It sounds like they were emotionally unavailable. Which may be true, but it doesn't ask the question of why you stayed with someone emotionally unavailable for as long as you did. It doesn't ask what that unavailability was doing for you, whether it let you stay at a safe distance too, whether it meant you never had to be feely seen, whether their unavailability was, on some level, a feature rather than a bug. It sounds like they didn't appreciate me, which may also be true, but it doesn't ask whether you made yourself easy to appreciate, whether you communicated what you needed clearly, whether you showed up as the full version of yourself or a managed, careful version designed to be likable, whether you were actually present in the relationship or just there. It sounds like I gave everything and got nothing back. And I want to be careful here because sometimes this is just true, full stop, and you really were in something that took without returning. But sometimes, I gave everything as covering for something else. Sometimes giving everything is a way of controlling the dynamic. Sometimes the constant giving is designed unconsciously
to put the other person in debt, to make leaving harder for them, to build a case in advance for why you're the good one if this falls apart. Giving can be generous. Giving can also be a strategy, and only you know which one it was. It sounds like they changed, but people don't usually change in a vacuum. Relationships change people. Your behavior in the relationship changes people. The environment you two created together changes both of you. When someone becomes distant or cold or checked out, it's worth asking, genuinely, honestly asking, what the environment was like. What was it like to be with you when things were hard? What they were responding to. I'm not saying it was your fault they changed. I'm saying change doesn't happen in isolation, and the story that casts you as the passive witness to someone else's transformation is probably missing some of your own. Here's the thing about the comfortable story. The one where you're the one who tried and they're the one who failed. The one where the ending is their fault and your pain is entirely undeserved and there's nothing to examine on your end. That story feels better in the short term. Of course it does. It protects you from the really uncomfortable work of looking at yourself clearly. It lets you stay in the grief without having to complicate it with accountability. It lets you be sad without also having to be honest. But it has a cost, a specific, measurable cost. The cost is that you take nothing from this into the next thing. You exit this relationship with the same patterns, the same blind spots, the same tendencies that contributed to the ending. Because you never looked at them, you never identified them, you never held them up to the light and said, this is a me thing, this is something I do, this needs to change, and then you do it again. Different person, same dynamic, different face on the same shape of relationship, and it ends the same way. And you tell the same story again, and the story protects you again, and you take nothing again. That loop is why some people go their entire lives in relationships that follow the same pattern and never understand why. Not because they're unlucky, because they're very good at being the protagonist of a story that never asks them to grow. I want to be specific about some of the things we do, the actual behaviors, because I think naming them is more useful than speaking in abstractions. We go cold when we should go honest. Something bothers us and something real and something worth addressing, and instead of saying it clearly, we pull back. We get quieter. We create distance. We let the temperature in the room drop and wait for the other person to notice and ask. And when they don't ask, or when they ask wrong or not enough or in the wrong tone, we take that as evidence that they don't care. When really what happened is we asked them to read our minds and they failed a test they didn't know they were taking. We punish in small ways. We're less warm after a fight. We remember and bring it up later. We keep score and then act like we're not keeping score. We do the thing where we say, I'm fine, while very clearly not being fine, and then resent them for believing us. We pick the wrong moments to be honest and then wonder why honesty doesn't go well. We drop something heavy right when they're stressed or exhausted or in the middle of something. And when the conversation doesn't go the way we needed, we add it to the list of evidence that they can't handle us, that they don't prioritize our feelings, that they're not equipped for this relationship. We confuse intimacy with intensity. We think fighting means we care. We think drama means depth. We manufacture urgency in relationships that are actually healthy and stable because health and stability feel boring, feel underfamiliar, feel like the absence of passion rather than the presence of something real. We love loudly in the beginning and quietly disappear as it gets more real. We're incredibly present and attentive in the early phase, and then once we feel secure, we coast. We stop putting in the effort that got us here because we think arrival means the work is done. It doesn't. Arrival is when the work starts. We make the other person responsible for our emotional state. When we're happy, it's because of them, and we tell them so. But when we're anxious or insecure or struggling, that's also because of them. Their behavior, their distance, something they did or didn't do. We make them the weather of our inner life and then resent them for not always being sunny. We leave before we leave. We check out emotionally while still physically present. We stop investing in the thing months before it technically ends, and then when it ends, we act like we were fully in it right up to the last moment. We weren't. We'd already started protecting ourselves from a loss we were quietly engineering. Any of that land. Here's what I think is actually underneath the coping, because I don't think it's dishonesty. Exactly. I don't think most people sit down and consciously decide to distort what happened. I think it's fear. Specifically the fear that if you look at your role clearly, If you actually account for your part of the wreckage, you'll find something unfixable, something fundamentally wrong with you, some evidence that you are, at your core, the kind of person who ruins things, who doesn't know how to love correctly, who is too much or not enough or broken in some way that won't yield to effort. That's the fear underneath the story. The story protects you from having to find out if that fear is true. But here's what I want you to hear. Actually hear it. Looking at your part in something doesn't mean confirming your worst fears about yourself. It just means looking at behaviors, patterns, choices, things you did in specific moments for specific reasons that you can understand and, if you choose to, change. You are not your worst moments in a relationship. You are also not separate from them. They're data. They tell you something about where you were, what you needed, how you were operating, and that information is genuinely useful if you let yourself have it. The fear says if I look honestly, I'll find out I'm irredeemable. The truth is, if you look honestly, you'll find out you're human, imperfect and patterned, and sometimes self-protective in ways that hurt other people, just like every person who has ever been in a relationship. That's not a verdict, that's a starting point. Let me talk about what accountability actually looks like, because I think people avoid it partly because they imagine it as this punishing, self-flagellating thing, like looking honestly at yourself means spending months in a shame spiral, rehashing everything you did wrong, deciding you're terrible. That's not accountability, that's just shame with better lighting. Real accountability is quieter than that. It looks more like sitting down at some point when the sharpest grief has passed and asking yourself some honest questions, not rhetorical ones designed to confirm a narrative, actual ones. What did I do in this relationship that I wouldn't want someone to do to me? Not the obvious stuff, not the big fights or the bad days. The small, consistent stuff. The daily texture of how I showed up. What did I know was wrong and keep doing anyway? What did I avoid saying because saying it would have required me to change something I wasn't ready to change? Where was I unfair? Not just in the moments I already know about, the ones I've been editing out of the version I tell people. What did this person need from me that I wasn't willing to give? And was it actually something I couldn't give? Or just something I chose not to? Those questions are hard. They're supposed to be hard. But they're also genuinely useful in a way that no amount of righteous anger about what they did to you ever will be. Because the answers to those questions travel with you. They're portable. They go into the next relationship and make you better at it. They turn heartbreak into something that costs you once instead of costing you every time. There's one more thing I want to name before we get to the other side of this, and it's the one that's hardest to say because it implicates something we don't like to look at. Sometimes the coping isn't just about protecting yourself from accountability. Sometimes it's about protecting your image of yourself as a good person, as someone who loves well, as someone who, when relationships end, can look back and genuinely say, I tried, I was present, I gave it everything. That image matters to a lot of us, more than we admit. We want to be the person who loved honestly and got hurt anyway, not the person who contributed to their own heartbreak through avoidable choices. We want to be the protagonist of a love story, not the cautionary tale. And so we protect the image. We curate the memory. We tell the story to friends in a way that quietly omits the parts where we weren't our best selves. And slowly, through repetition, we start to believe the curated version. It becomes the real one. The messy, complicated actual version gets buried under the one that makes us look okay. But you can't grow from a version of yourself that you've cleaned up for public consumption. You grow from the real one, the one that includes the moments you're not proud of, the one that captures not just what happened, but how you made people feel, the one that honestly accounts for what you brought into the room, the insecurity, the patterns, the defense mechanisms, the ways you protected yourself that accidentally hurt someone else. And that version isn't shameful, it's just true. And truth is the only thing you can actually work with. I want to say something about the grief, because I don't want this to feel like I'm dismissing it. Your pain is real. Whatever happened, however complicated your role in it, the loss is real and the hurt is real, and you are allowed to feel all of it without having to earn it through perfect behavior. You don't have to have been blameless to deserve to grieve. The grief and the accountability can exist at the same time. In fact, I think that's the only way to actually heal from something like this, not choosing between feeling it and examining it, but doing both. Letting yourself hurt fully while also slowly, with compassion for yourself, looking at what's yours to own. Because the coping and the comfortable story, the edited version, it doesn't actually protect you from the pain. It just reroutes it. You still feel it, you still carry it. You just carry it alongside a story that keeps you from understanding it. And understanding it is what lets you put it down eventually. Not the story, the actual thing. The real account of what happened, your role in theirs, what was real and what was projected, what was love and what was fear wearing love's clothes. That understanding is the only version of this that leads somewhere. The story just leads back to the same place. So stop coping, or start slowly to stop. Not all at once, not by burning down every comforting thing you've been telling yourself in the one brutal session of self-examination. That's not useful either. Just start making room. Start allowing the possibility that the story you've been telling isn't the whole story. Start letting the questions in, not to punish yourself, but because you are curious about yourself and you deserve to know yourself accurately. Start being as honest with yourself about your own behavior as you are about theirs. Because here's what's true. The heartbreak you're carrying right now and the real weight of it, the part that won't quite heal, I don't think it's only about them. I think some of it is about you. About things you did that you wish you'd done differently. About the person you were in this relationship that you don't fully want to be. You know that. You've known it. You've just been covering it with everything else because sitting with it is hard and sitting with it feels like losing. But it's not losing, it's the beginning of actually getting somewhere. The pain doesn't go away when you stop coping, but it changes shape. It becomes something you can hold and look at and learn from instead of something that just lives in you without meaning. And meaning is the only thing that makes any of this worth what it cost. You already paid. You might as well take what you bought. There's a moment after a relationship ends that nobody really prepares you for. It's not the breakup itself. It's what happens after. When everything gets quiet. That's when your mind starts doing something you can't seem to stop. You replay it. The conversations, the moments, the little details that didn't seem important at the time. Your brain starts going back through everything like it's searching for something you missed. You think about the way they said certain things, the tone in their voice during that one argument, the night things felt slightly different but you couldn't explain why. And suddenly those memories feel heavier than they did before, because now you're looking at them with the one thing you didn't have back then, the ending. So your mind keeps asking questions. Was that the moment things started going wrong? Was that when they stopped feeling the same way? Was there something I could have said differently? Something I could have done better? And the worst part is you never get answers. So instead, your brain keeps replaying the same scenes over and over again. Like if you analyze it enough times, you'll finally find the explanation that makes everything make sense. But it never really works that way. Because breakups don't usually come from one single moment. They come from 1,000 small things building up quietly over time. Still, that doesn't stop your mind from trying, late at night especially, when the distractions are gone, when your phone isn't buzzing, when the room is dark, when it's just you and your thoughts. That's when the memories get the loudest. You remember the good moments first, the way they used to laugh, the way they looked at you when things were still easy, the little routines you built together without even realizing it. And for a second, it almost feels like they're still there. Then reality comes back, and your mind jumps to the next question. What did I do wrong? Because when someone you loved walks away, it's almost impossible not to assume that somewhere along the way, you messed it up. So you go back through everything again, trying to find the exact moment where things could have been saved. But the truth is, the more you replay it in your head, the more trapped you start to feel in something that already ended. And that's the part nobody talks about. Sometimes the relationship doesn't end when the person leaves. Sometimes it ends weeks later, when you finally stop reliving it. The strange thing about replaying a relationship in your head is that your mind doesn't show you the whole story. It shows you selected scenes, little moments that suddenly feel way more important than they did at the time. You remember the last conversation you had with them. Every word, every pause, every sentence you wish you could take back. You start thinking about what would have happened if you just said something different. Maybe if you had stayed calmer. Maybe if you didn't bring up that one thing. Maybe if you gave them more space. Your brain turns it into this giant what-if loop. What if I did this differently? What if I handled that moment better? What if I noticed the signs earlier? And slowly, without even realizing it, you start rewriting the past in your head. You create these alternate versions of the relationship where everything works out. In those versions, you say the perfect thing. You catch the problems early, you fix the issues before they grow. And in those imaginary timelines, they stay. But reality doesn't work like that. The real relationship didn't have the benefit of hindsight. It was messy. It had misunderstandings. Moments where both of you were tired. Conversations that didn't go the way either of you wanted. And the truth is, two people can genuinely care about each other and still not be able to make it work. But your brain doesn't like accepting that, because accepting that means admitting something painful. Sometimes there wasn't a single moment you could have fixed. Sometimes the ending wasn't about one mistake. It was about two people who just couldn't meet each other where they needed to. Still, your mind keeps searching, because if you can find the moment where everything went wrong, it gives you the illusion that you had control, that maybe you could have prevented the ending. But deep down, you already know something that's hard to accept. If someone was truly meant to stay, the relationship wouldn't collapse because of one imperfect conversation. Love that lasts doesn't disappear over one moment. And when you finally start realizing that, something shifts. The memories don't disappear overnight. You'll still think about them sometimes. But slowly, you stop treating every memory like a clue in a mystery you need to solve. Because some stories don't need to be solved. They just need to be closed. The hardest part about replaying everything in your head is that you think you're searching for closure. But most of the time, you're actually just reopening the wound. Every time you revisit the memories, you're putting yourself back in those moments again. Back in the conversations, back in the arguments, back in the days when things started feeling different, and your brain keeps asking the same question. Why? Why did they stop loving me? Why did things change? Why wasn't I enough for them to stay? But here's the thing about closure. A lot of people think closure comes from the other person explaining everything perfectly. They imagine one final conversation where the other person sits down and says exactly what happened, exactly why things ended, and somehow that explanation makes the pain disappear. But real life rarely works like that. Most endings don't come with perfect explanations. Sometimes people don't even fully understand their own reasons. Sometimes they just feel something change inside them. And that's a terrifying thing to accept. Because if love can change without a clear explanation, then it means there wasn't necessarily a moment you could have prevented. And that's what your mind is trying to fight against. Your mind keeps replaying everything because it wants control. It wants to believe there was a specific moment where the outcome could have been different. But the truth that hurts the most is this. Not every ending is caused by a mistake. Sometimes two people just reach a point where they can't continue together. Not because one of them failed, not because one of them wasn't good enough, but because the relationship itself couldn't keep going. And once that happens, no amount of replaying the past will change it. No amount of analyzing old conversations will bring the person back. All it does is keep you emotionally tied to something that already ended. That's why healing doesn't start when the breakup happens. Healing starts when you stop trying to solve the past. When you finally allow yourself to accept something difficult, the relationship is over. And even though your mind keeps pulling you back into those memories, your life is still moving forward. Whether you're ready for it or not, at some point you start noticing something. The memories aren't hurting you the same way they used to. Not because they disappeared, but because you finally stopped treating them like something you need to fix. For a long time, your mind kept going back to the same moments. The last argument, the last message, the last time you saw them. Like if you could just understand it perfectly, the pain would finally make sense. But eventually you realized something important. You weren't replaying it because the answer was still there. You were replaying it because letting go felt like losing them all over again. So part of you held on, not to the relationship itself, but to the idea that maybe you could still figure it out. Maybe if you understood what went wrong, it would somehow undo the ending. But life doesn't give us that kind of control. Some people enter your life, change you in ways you didn't expect, and then they leave. And you don't always get a clean explanation. You don't always get a moment where everything makes sense. Sometimes all you get is time to slowly accept that the story already reached its ending. And when you finally stop replaying it in your head, you start noticing something else. Your life didn't end with that relationship. There are still new people you haven't met. New memories you haven't made. New moments waiting for you that have nothing to do with the past you've been stuck in. Because the truth is, You were never meant to spend the rest of your life trapped in old conversations or wondering about the words you wish you said differently. You were meant to keep living, and one day, without even realizing when it happened, you'll think about them again. But this time it won't feel like a wound. It'll just feel like a chapter of your life that already ended. And you'll finally understand something that once felt impossible. The past only has power over you, as long as you keep replaying it.
What if everything was okay? I want you to sit with that question for a second before we go anywhere. Not as a rhetorical thing, not as the opening move of a piece that's about to tell you why everything actually isn't okay and here's what you should do about it. Just as an actual question, a real one. What if everything was okay? What if the text meant nothing? What if the quiet was just quiet? What if the distance you've been feeling was just life being life, and not a signal that something is ending or unraveling or quietly moving away from you? What if the job was actually fine, the relationship was actually fine, the version of yourself you've been worrying about was actually closer to fine than the version your brain has been showing you at 2 a.m.? What if you've been living a problem that doesn't exist? I know how that sounds. I know some of you are reading that and thinking, but the problem is real. The thing I'm worried about is real. I'm not making this up. And you might be right. Some of what you're carrying is real. I'm not dismissing that. But I want to ask the question anyway, because I think for a lot of us, more of us than we'd like to admit, the answer to what if everything was okay is something we haven't let ourselves fully consider, something that feels almost dangerous to believe. Because if everything is okay, then all the energy we've spent managing the ways it isn't was wasted. And if it was wasted, what does that say about how we've been living? That's the question underneath the question. And it's worth sitting with. Let me start with why okay is so hard to trust. Because I don't think the difficulty is random. I don't think you distrust okay because you're irrational or neurotic or constitutionally incapable of peace. I think you distrust okay because okay has been taken away from you before. In specific moments with specific people, and circumstances that started as fine and turned into something else without sufficient warning. You were okay once and then you weren't. And the transition happened fast enough or without enough signal that your nervous system made a note. The note said, okay is temporary. Okay is the thing that exists right before something changes. Okay is not a stable state, it's a phase, a corridor, a brief pause between the last hard thing and the next one. And so you stopped being able to fully inhabit okay. Because inhabiting it fully means trusting it. And trusting it means being exposed when it ends. And being exposed when it ends, being surprised by the loss, being caught without your guard up, being genuinely blindsided by something you could have been preparing for. That has happened before and the cost was significant. So you stay slightly ahead of okay. You scan the horizon, you monitor for the thing that's going to end the good period. Because if you can see it coming, you can be ready. And being ready is the closest thing to safe that your nervous system knows how to do. That's not a flaw. That's a perfectly rational adaptation to a history that trains you to expect disruption. The problem is that the adaptation is now running in environments that don't require it. In relationships and circumstances that are actually stable. In moments of genuine okay that you are moving through without being able to feel them because the monitoring never stops. Here's what living outside of okay actually looks like. The daily texture of it. Because I think when it's named specifically, the recognition is useful. It looks like being 3 conversations ahead. The thing being said right now is barely registering, because you're already running the implications, already following the thread to its possible ends, already preparing responses to versions of this conversation that haven't happened. And the person talking to you, the actual person, in this actual moment, is getting a version of presence that is actually absence dressed up as listening. It looks like waiting for the other shoe to drop and cite good things. The relationship is going well. And somewhere in you, there's a quiet countdown. The job is stable, and part of you is already practicing what it would feel like if it wasn't. The friendship is real and warm, and you're enjoying it with one eye on the exit, because people leave, and you've learned not to be surprised when they do. You're enjoying things with a built-in distance, a slight remove, a refusal to fully arrive because fully arrive is what you do right before you get hurt. It looks like being unable to receive good things cleanly. A compliment arrives, and something in you immediately starts auditing it. Is it true? What did they want? Why are they saying this now? The compliment is real. You can probably tell it's real, but your brain has developed a processing step between receiving and believing that almost nothing gets through cleanly. You're filtering the good stuff. You've built infrastructure specifically designed to make the good stuff less able to reach you. And it looks like exhaustion that doesn't make sense on paper. Your life from the outside is fine. Nothing catastrophic is happening. You're managing. But you're tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix because you've been working overtime on threat detection. It hasn't found a real threat in a while and doesn't know how to stand down. I want to talk about what you're missing while you're not in okay. Not in an accusatory way, not in a you're wasting your life way, just the specific things that are happening in the present tense that you're not fully experiencing because part of your attention is elsewhere. You're missing the ease of the people who love you, the specific quality of being with someone who is genuinely glad you're there. Not performing gladness, not being polite, but actually lit up by your presence in a way that doesn't require anything from you except to just be there. That quality is available to you in relationships you already have, and you're experiencing it at about 60% because 40% of you is monitoring whether it's going to last. You're missing your own good moments, the times when something funny happens and you laugh, really laugh, the involuntary kind. And for a second, you're completely in it. And then the brain catches up and starts analyzing what the laughter means and whether it's appropriate and what comes next, and the moment is gone before you even registered having it. You've been having your experiences slightly after the fact, processing them as they pass rather than inhabiting them as they happen. You're missing the specific piece of a Tuesday that is just a Tuesday, not building toward anything, not the calm before something. Just a day that is what it is, the coffee in the morning, the particular quality of afternoon light, the conversation that doesn't go anywhere important and doesn't need to, the completely ordinary hours that make up most of a life and that you've been moving through like a waiting room instead of like the actual content of being alive. Those things are your life, not the milestone moments, not the dramatic events, not the things worth reporting when someone asks how you've been. The Tuesdays, the ordinary good things that don't make the highlight reel but constitute most of the hours. You've been in those hours. You've just not been fully present for them. Here's a question I want to ask, and I want you to actually think about it rather than answering reflexively. What would you have to give up if everything was okay? Because I don't think the resistance to okay is purely unconscious. I think there are specific things that the not okay serves. And until those things are named, the okay is going to keep being hard to access. Some people would have to give up their explanation. The story of why things aren't working, why they haven't arrived where they wanted to be, why the relationships keep going the way they go. The not okay is doing real narrative work. It explains the gap between where you are and where you thought you'd be. If everything was okay, the gap would have to be explained some other way, and the other way might require looking at choices rather than circumstances. That's a harder look. Some people would have to give up their vigilance, the monitoring, the scanning, the constant low-grade preparedness for things going wrong. And the vigilance, while exhausting, is also a kind of purpose, a job. It gives you something to do with the part of you that can't be still. If everything was okay, that part would have to find somewhere else to go. And somewhere else feels like nowhere. Some people would have to give up their identity as someone who is going through something. The person in the hard season has a specific kind of meaning attached to their struggle. People check on you. You have something real to work through. Your life has a kind of weight to it that disappears if everything is okay. And the absence of weight, the lightness of things actually being fine, can feel strangely like loss, like you've been demoted from something significant to something ordinary. None of that is shameful. All of it is human. But it's worth naming, because the okay is going to keep feeling threatening until you understand what its arrival would cost. I want to say something about the relationship between okay and love, because I think this is where the distrust of okay does the most quiet damage. Love, real love, exists mostly in the okay moments, not in the dramatic ones, not in the fights and the reconciliations and the intensity and the moments of crisis that bring people back to each other. Those moments are real and they have their own meaning, but they're not where love actually lives day to day. Love lives in the Tuesday morning, in the way someone hands you something without being asked, in the conversation that goes nowhere in particular but leaves you feeling known, and the specific comfort of being in a room with someone and not needing the room to be anything other than what it is. Those moments are okay moments. Quiet, ordinary, unremarkable. And if you can't trust okay, if you're always monitoring from a slight distance, always waiting for the texture to change, you're moving through the place where love actually lives without being able to feel it. You're loving people from behind glass. The warmth is real, the connection is real, but you're not quite in contact with it, and the person loving you back can feel that, not as something you're doing wrong, as a distance it can't quite close, as a reaching that never quite lands. And they keep trying. The good ones keep trying. But at some point, being unable to reach someone who is physically present becomes its own kind of lonely. You're not protecting them from your uncertainty. You're keeping them from the version of you that could actually be reached. Let me say something about the version of you that exists when you're actually in okay. The one that doesn't have to be managed into being, that just shows up when the monitoring goes quiet long enough. That version is lighter. Not in a way that lacks depth, in a way that isn't carrying extra weight. It moves through rooms differently. It's more present in conversations because it isn't running parallel processing on what the conversation might mean. It laughs more freely because it isn't checking whether the laughter is appropriate. It reaches for people more naturally because it isn't first assessing the risk of the reaching. You've been that version before. In the moments when the vigilance broke down not because you decided to let it, but because something pulled you fully into the present before the monitoring could catch up. A piece of music. A really good conversation. A sunset that arrived at exactly the right moment. a laugh that was too genuine to be managed. In those moments, you were in your life, fully, completely, without the remove. And then the moment passed and the monitoring resumed, and you went back to the slight distance. But the version of you that existed in those moments, present, unguarded, actually here, that's not a special occasion version. That's the version that's available more broadly if the conditions for it are created more intentionally. If the monitoring is given permission to stand down not just when something pulls you in, but as a practice. A daily, ongoing, imperfect practice of choosing to be in the thing you're actually in. That version is you. More fundamentally you than the vigilant one. The vigilant one was built for a specific purpose. The present one is who you were before the purpose arrived. So what does it look like to let everything be okay? Not as a permanent state, not as a denial of real things that are hard, but as a practice. A daily choice to be where things actually are instead of where your brain has already moved to. It starts with the body. Because okay doesn't arrive as a thought first. It arrives as a physical state, and the body that has been in low-grade threat mode for a long time has forgotten what the alternative feels like, so you start there. In the physical sensation of a moment that doesn't require anything from you. The breath that's slower than it needs to be. The shoulders that drop. The specific quality of a body that is not currently in danger and is being allowed to know that. That experience is available more often than you've been accessing it. Not always. Real life has real difficulty, but in the ordinary moments, in the Tuesday morning, in the conversation with someone who is genuinely glad you're there, it's available. And it requires something from you. It requires you to put down the monitoring long enough to be in the moment you're actually in, not permanently. Just for this moment, this specific current actual moment that is not requiring anything except your presence in it. And then the next one, and then the one after that. Because that's what okay is, when you let it be what it is. Not a destination, not a phase before something harder, not something that will be taken away if you trust it too fully. Just a series of moments that don't require you to be anywhere other than in them. The past that hurts you is real, the future that might be hard is possible. But neither of them is here right now. What's here right now is just this. Just okay. What if everything was okay? I think for a lot of you the answer is, it might be. More often than you're allowing yourself to experience it, more of the time than the monitoring has been willing to admit, in more of your relationships and more of your ordinary days, and more of the hours you've been moving through from a slight remove. The okay is there. It's been there. You've been in it while not quite being in it. You're allowed to be in it. Not as a denial of what's been hard, not as a pretense that life doesn't have difficulty, just as an honest accounting of what this moment actually is. And this moment, right now as you read this, is probably closer to okay than the part of you that never stops scanning is willing to admit. Let it be okay, not forever, not unconditionally. Just right now, just this moment. That's all okay ever asks. Just this one, and then the next. And then the one after that, that's how you come back to your own life. One moment at a time, choosing to be in the one you're actually in.
There's a version of you that exists only in your head. It's the version that said the wrong thing in that conversation 3 years ago and is still replaying it. The version that's already prepared a full emotional response to a fight that hasn't happened yet. The version that read one slightly short text message and spent 45 minutes building a case for why everything is falling apart. That version of you is exhausting, and it never sleeps. And if you're being honest, it runs a lot more of your life than you'd like to admit. I've been thinking about this for a while, not in a clinical way. I'm not here to diagnose anything or hand you a breathing exercise, but in the way you think about something when you've lived inside it long enough that you finally want to understand it. When the pattern has repeated enough times that you're done being surprised by it and ready to actually look at it. Because I think a lot of us are losing to our own minds, quietly, daily, in ways that don't look dramatic from the outside, but are absolutely exhausting from the inside. And I think we've been told it's just anxiety, it's just overthinking. Take a walk, drink some water, journal about it. And none of that is wrong exactly, but it's also not quite getting at the thing. The thing is deeper than a habit, it's closer to a worldview. Let me start at the beginning, or at least the beginning as I understand it. Your mind learned to do this. It wasn't born doing it. At some point, probably pretty early, you were in a situation where paying close attention to other people's moods and signals and the slightest shifts in their behavior was actually useful. Where catching the early warning signs kept you from getting hurt. Where being one step ahead of a situation meant you could manage it before it managed you. So your brain got good at that. Really good. Exceptionally, almost professionally good at scanning for threat. At noticing the micro shift in someone's tone and running it through a threat assessment model at lightning speed. at filling in the gaps between what people say and what they might mean with worst case scenarios, because worst case scenarios are what your brain learned to prepare for. That was adaptive once. It kept you safe. It helped you navigate something that was genuinely hard to navigate, but you carried it out of that situation and into every situation after it. And now you're threat scanning in a text message from someone who loves you. Now you're running worst case scenarios about a meeting that hasn't happened yet. Now you're braced for impact in environments that are not actually dangerous, with people who are not actually threatening, because your nervous system never got the memo that the original thing ended. It's still doing its job. The job is just wrong for where you are now. Here's what overthinking actually feels like from the inside, because I think it gets flattened into a word, overthinking, and that word doesn't capture the texture of it. It starts with a small thing, almost always a small thing that your mind snags on, the way a nail snags a piece of clothing, something someone said or didn't say, the way a conversation ended, a silence that lasted a second too long, a tone that was slightly off from how it usually sounds. Most people's brains would register that small thing, file it under probably nothing, and move on. Your brain doesn't do that. Your brain picks it up and starts turning it over, looking at it from every angle, running through possible explanations, building a context around it. And because your brain is very good at building context, because you are honestly an intelligent and perceptive person, the context it builds is detailed, specific, coherent. It has internal logic it hangs together. It just might be completely wrong. And here's the brutal part. You know it might be wrong. Somewhere in there, underneath all the architecture your brain is constructing, there's a quieter voice saying, you don't actually know this. You're guessing this might be nothing. But the louder voice, like the one with all the evidence it's been collecting, the one that has built this whole case, that voice is very convincing. It has receipts. It has a timeline. It has a narrative that makes sense, so you believe it, or at least you half believe it, enough to act on it, enough to pull back a little or go quiet or preemptively protect yourself from a wound that might not be coming. And then the thing you were afraid of might actually happen. Not because you were right, but because the way you responded to your own fear created the distance you were trying to prevent. That's the loop. That's the one that runs your life if you let it. I want to talk about relationships specifically because I think this is where the overthinking mind does its most significant damage. And I think it's because relationships are inherently ambiguous. People are complicated, communication is imperfect, feelings shift. And ambiguity is exactly the kind of environment where an overthinking brain absolutely goes to town. You're with someone, or close to being with someone, and things are good, things are genuinely good, but your brain doesn't fully trust good. Good feels precarious. Good feels like a setup for something. So even while things are good, there's a part of you that's quietly scanning for the thing that's going to make it not good. And because you're scanning for it, you find things. Not because they're definitely there, but because if you look hard enough at anything, any relationship, any person, you will find ambiguity. You will find moments that could be read multiple ways. You will find evidence for almost any narrative if that's what you're building. So you find something, a slightly distant response, a canceled plan, a moment where they seemed somewhere else, and the machine kicks in. And now you're building the case for why this is falling apart while simultaneously pretending everything is fine. Because you know that bringing this up will make you seem crazy, will make you seem like too much, so you hold it. You process it internally. You have the conversation in your head 100 times. You prepare for outcomes that haven't happened. You grieve things that are still here. And all of that invisible work, all of that mental labor that the other person has no idea is happening, exhausts you, makes you quieter than you actually are, makes you pull back when you want to be close, makes you act in ways that are slightly misaligned with how you actually feel, because you're not responding to reality. You're responding to the story your brain wrote about reality. And eventually, inevitably, the other person notices that something is off, not what's actually off. They can't see that. It's all internal. Just that something is off. And they adjust. And you interpret their adjustment as confirmation of the story you already wrote. And the loop tightens. Here's the part I want to sit with for a minute, because I think it's the part that gets missed. Overthinking isn't just a processing style. It's also, underneath everything, a form of control. Stay with me on this. When you can't control whether someone is going to hurt you, and you can't. You never can. That's just the fundamental vulnerability of caring about people. Your brain finds another way to feel in control. It prepares, it anticipates, it runs every possible scenario so that when something goes wrong, at least you saw it coming. At least you're not blindsided. At least the pain arrives in a context you already built. Because being blindsided feels worse than being right about something bad. Being surprised by loss feels more devastating than having predicted it. So your brain works very hard, all the time, to make sure you are never surprised. The cost of that is never being fully present, never being fully relaxed into something good, always holding a part of yourself back, just in case, always watching the door even when you're inside somewhere warm. It's a terrible trade, but it feels like the safer one, and your brain is always going to root toward what feels safe. Let me tell you what the really insidious version of this looks like. Because the everyday overthinking, the text analysis, the reading of rooms, the pre-lived arguments, that stuff is visible enough that you can at least identify it. The insidious version is quieter. It's the way you talk yourself out of good things before they have a chance to become good. Someone shows interest, and instead of letting yourself feel that, you immediately start cataloging their flaws. Not because they're actually deal breakers, because if you can find enough flaws, then when it doesn't work out, you can point to the flaws. You already knew you were never fully in it. It's the way you self-sabotage in advance. Pull back before they can pull back. End it before it can end badly. Leave before you can be left. It's the way you rewrite your own history to confirm the story your brain likes to tell. You felt something real, and then it hurt. And now when you look back at it, your brain has quietly edited the memory so that the signs were always there. You should have known. You were naive to trust it. Look how clearly it was written on the wall from the beginning. It wasn't written on the wall from the beginning. You were just present, open, hoping, the way a person is supposed to be. And something went wrong. And now your brain is retroactively building the case that you should have been closed. Because being closed would have hurt less. Being closed would have hurt less. And also produced nothing. And also made you smaller. And also been a kind of living death. But your brain doesn't calculate for aliveness, it calculates for safety. And sometimes safety and aliveness point in completely opposite directions. I've been thinking about the relationship between overthinking and self-worth, because I don't think they're separate things. I think a lot of people who overthink, not all, but a lot, do it because somewhere underneath the mental noise, there is a quiet belief that they are more likely to be rejected than not, that if someone really knew them, they'd leave. That the connection they feel is always more fragile than it appears, because they are, in some fundamental way, more difficult to love than other people, and the overthinking is partly an attempt to manage that. If you can see the rejection coming, you can prepare. If you can find the evidence early, you're not naive. If you hold back a little, you're protected. But also, and this is the part that's harder to say, the overthinking feeds that belief. Because when you're constantly generating worst case scenarios, constantly looking for the signs of leaving, constantly preparing for the end, you are practicing the belief that the end is inevitable. You are rehearsing it. You are making it more real in your body and your nervous system every single time you run the simulation. The mind is very literal about what it practices. If you practice being rejected, your brain gets better at feeling rejected. If you spend enough time preparing for loss, your nervous system stops distinguishing between the preparation and the actual thing. You end up carrying the emotional weight of a loss that hasn't happened. And you do that every day, for weeks, months, years. And then people ask why you seem tired. So what do you do with it? I'm not going to pretend I have the full answer. I don't think the full answer exists in a way that can be written down and handed to you, but I do think there are some true things worth saying. The first one is, your thoughts are not facts. I know that sounds like something on a motivational poster, and I'm sorry about that because it's actually a profound and difficult thing to practice. Your mind produces thoughts the way your body produces heat, constantly, automatically, without your permission. And not all of those thoughts are accurate. Not all of those thoughts deserve to be believed. The feeling of certainty that your brain attaches to its worst case scenarios is not evidence that those scenarios are real. It's just evidence that your brain is very good at its job. The second one is, presence is the antidote, and presence is hard. Because presence means actually being in the moment you're in, not the moment your brain has already moved to. It means feeling the good thing while it's happening instead of scanning it for the reasons it won't last. It means trusting, not blindly, not naively, but with the actual evidence in front of you that right now things are okay. Letting okay be okay without immediately upgrading it to a threat. The third one, and this is the one that took me the longest, is that you have to grieve the version of safety that overthinking promises. Because it does promise something. It promises that if you think hard enough, prepare enough, stay alert enough, you will be protected. You will not be caught off guard. You will not be hurt in the ways you've been hurt before. That promise is a lie, but it's a comforting lie. And giving it up means accepting that you cannot think your way to safety in relationships. You cannot prepare your way out of vulnerability. The only way through is actually through, open, present, willing to be surprised by both the good and the bad. That is terrifying if you are someone who has been hurt, and most of the people reading this have been hurt. But the alternative, staying inside the machine, living in the pre-lived loss, holding yourself back from the full experience of being alive with another person, that's not safety. That's just a slower kind of missing out. Your mind gets the best of you because it loves you in its way. It is trying to protect you. It learned something once about how the world works, and it has been faithfully applying that lesson ever since. Even when the lesson no longer applies, even when the environment changed and the people changed and you changed, it doesn't know it's out of date. It just keeps running the old program, trying to keep you safe, costing you peace. You are not broken. You are not too much. You are not fundamentally harder to love than other people. You are someone whose brain learned to be very careful, and that carefulness served a purpose once, and now it's costing you more than it's protecting you. And the work, the long, uncomfortable, ongoing, nonlinear work, is teaching it that it's okay to put the armor down. Not all the way, not all at once, just enough to let something real get in, just enough to be here, actually here, in the life you're living instead of the one your mind keeps rehearsing. That's the whole thing, that's all of it. Let yourself be here. You're always the loser. There's a version of losing that nobody prepares you for. Not the kind where you fail a test or lose a job or get broken up with in a parking lot while your hazards are still on. That kind of losing is clean. It hurts, but it has a shape. You know what you lost. You know when it happened. You can point to the moment and say, that's the one. That's where it went wrong. The kind I'm talking about doesn't have a moment. It's the kind where you keep showing up, keep trying, keep being the bigger person, keep choosing the high road, and somehow, at the end of all of it, you're still the one sitting alone wondering where you went wrong. You did everything right, or at least you did more right than wrong, and you still lost. Not once, every time, and you start to wonder if that's just your thing, if losing is just something that happens to you specifically. I've been thinking about this for a while now, not in a wallowing way, more like there's something here I haven't named yet, and I need to name it before it keeps running my life. Because I think most of us who always end up losing in relationships, friendships, romantic stuff, family stuff, doesn't matter. We don't lose because we're bad at this. We lose because of something that looks like a strength from the outside, something that people compliment us for, something we were taught was the right way to be. We lose because we care more. And I know how that sounds. I know I care too much is the thing everyone says when they want to avoid accountability. Like, yeah, sure, buddy, you care too much. That's why you burned the whole thing down. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about the person who cares so much they become controlling or jealous or obsessive. That's a different thing. I'm talking about the person who genuinely, quietly, consistently loves people harder than those people love them back, and keeps doing it, and can't stop, and doesn't know why. That person always loses. Not dramatically, just slowly, over and over again. Let me back up. I think it starts young. Not in some deep trauma way. I'm not trying to make this a therapy session. But I do think most of us learned early what role we were playing. And some of us learned that our role was to be the one who holds things together. Maybe you were the kid who noticed when mom was in a mood and adjusted accordingly. Maybe you were the one in your friend group who everyone came to when stuff was falling apart. But when your stuff was falling apart, you kind of just handled it yourself because it felt like too much to ask. Maybe you were the sibling who kept the peace, the partner who apologized first even when you weren't wrong, just because the silence was too heavy. You learned that love looked like management, like anticipation, like making yourself small enough that everyone else could be big. And here's the thing, and it worked. People liked you, people needed you, people said you were the glue, the rock, the steady one. Nobody asked if the glue was tired, so you kept going. You got good at it, really good. You got so good at reading rooms and adjusting and being whatever the situation needed that you kind of forgot to figure out what you needed. Or maybe you knew somewhere, but asking for it felt like breaking a rule you didn't write, but somehow agreed to. And that pattern, that beautiful, exhausting, self-erasing pattern, follows you into every relationship you ever have. Here's how it plays out in practice. You meet someone, it could be a friend, could be someone you're falling for, doesn't matter. You connect, it feels real. And from the jump, you're in it, you're present, you remember the details, you follow up on the thing they mentioned 2 weeks ago, you show up when you said you would, you notice when something's off and you say something. They like this about you. They tell you. You're different, they say. You actually listen. You actually care, and you feel it, that warmth of being seen, of being valued, of finally being in something that feels like it matches what you've been putting out for years. Except, slowly, quietly, you start to notice the math doesn't add up. You text first most of the time. You're the one who makes the plan. When something good happens to you, you tell them, and they respond warmly but briefly and then pivot to themselves. And when something good happens to them, you ask follow-up questions. You want to know everything. You're genuinely excited for them. They don't do that for you. Not in the same way, and you tell yourself it's fine. People show love differently. You can't expect everyone to be exactly like you. That would be unfair. That would be projecting. So you keep going. But then something hard happens to you, something real, and you reach out and they're supportive, but it feels surface level, like they're being a good person in the way you are a good person. To a coworker you don't know that well, polite, present, but not in it with you. And you know the difference. You know what it feels like when someone is actually in it with you because you've been in it with them. You know what it feels like to sit with someone in their hard thing. You've done it, you're good at it. They're not doing that. They're being kind, but they're not in it with you. And here's the moment, here's the fork in the road that most of us don't even know we're standing at. You could say something, you could name it, you could say, hey, I feel like I'm carrying more of this than you are, and I need that to change. But you don't, because that feels like an accusation, because you don't want to be the person who keeps score. Because what if you're wrong? What if you're being too sensitive? What if bringing it up ruins the whole thing and then you lose them anyway and it's your fault? So you say nothing, and you adjust your expectations down a little, and you keep going. And 6 months later, you're half the person you were when you started this, and they're exactly the same, and you're exhausted, and you don't even know why. That's the loss. That's the one that doesn't have a moment. I want to talk about the hope problem, because I think hope is actually the engine of all of this. Not hope in the inspirational poster sense. I mean hope in the very specific, very quiet sense of, I think if I keep being this way, eventually it'll come back to me. You believe somewhere underneath everything that love is a long game, that consistency gets rewarded, that if you keep showing up and being real and caring deeply enough, one day the person on the other end of it will match you, will finally see what you've been putting out and rise to meet it. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes people do wake up. Sometimes the thing you've been patient for actually blooms, but a lot of the time, and I think most of us know this but don't want to say it, a lot of the time, the hope is just delay. It's a way of not having to grieve something that's clearly already gone. Because as long as you're hoping, you don't have to admit that the version of this you wanted was never actually available. That's brutal to accept. That someone you love genuinely, deeply, for real, that someone might just not be built to love you back the way you need. Not because they're bad, not because you did anything wrong, just because they're different. They're wired different. They're at a different place. They need different things. You can love someone and still be wrong for each other. You can care about someone and still be the wrong shape for the hole they're trying to fill. That is a complete sentence. That is the whole truth. There's no fix at the end of it. And when you're the person who loves more, when you're always the one who's more in it, more invested, more hopeful, that truth hits different. Because it means all that extra love you were putting out wasn't the solution. It was just yours. It lived in you. It didn't change anything. That's the part that makes you feel like a loser. But here's where I want to sit for a second, because I've been turning this over for a while and I think there's something we get wrong about what losing actually means. We treat losing like it's about outcome. You win if the relationship lasts. You lose if it ends. You win if they choose you. You lose if they don't. You win if you stop caring first. You lose if you still care when they've already moved on. By that math, yeah. If you're the one who cares more, you lose every time. You will always be the last one in and the last one out and the one who misses it the longest. But I'm not sure that's actually losing. I think what we call losing in love is often just feeling more. And feeling more is not the same as being worth less. It is not a character flaw. It is not a weakness. It is actually one of the rarest things a person can have. Most people spend their whole lives looking for someone who will love them with real depth, real presence, someone who actually listens, who actually shows up, who actually stays. And you who always ends up on the losing side of this, you are that person. You are the thing other people are searching for. The problem isn't that you care too much. The problem is that you keep handing that to people who can't hold it. And I know that sounds like I'm just reframing the same loss as a gift, which is a little bit of a cope. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. You can call it beautiful all you want, but it still hurts to be in a mostly empty thing when you wanted something full. But I do think there's a real difference between I keep losing because something is wrong with me, and I keep losing because I keep choosing people who can't match what I'm bringing. One of those is a sentence about your worth. The other is a sentence about your pattern. And patterns can change. Worth can't, because it was never the issue. Let me talk about the aftermath for a second, because I think that's where the real damage lives. When you've been the one who cared more enough times, something shifts in you. You start to get suspicious of your own feelings. You fall for someone and there's this voice in the back of your head, quiet but consistent, that says, I don't. You know how this goes, you know where you end up. So you hedge, you hold back a little, you don't text as much as you want to. You don't say the thing you're feeling right away. You play it cooler than you are because you've learned somewhere in your body that the full version of you is too much. And then, and this is the part that's really something, you end up in relationships where you're actually not fully present, where you're performing a version of yourself that's been dialed back. And those relationships don't work either because you're not actually in them. And you lose those too. So now you're losing when you care too much and losing when you try to care less. There's no version of this that's working, and the voice in the back of your head gets louder. See? You told you. You're just bad at this. You always lose, but you're not bad at it. You're just protecting yourself with a tool that's hurting you. The hedging, the holding back, the performance of indifference, that's not protection. That's just a different kind of losing. Slower, quieter, but still losing. Because you end up alone anyway, except this time you're also not yourself. I think the thing that actually needs to change, Tina, and I'm saying this as much to myself as anyone, is not the caring. Don't stop caring. Please don't let the world do that to you. The thing that needs to change is the selection, where you're putting it. Because if you're honest, really honest, you probably knew early. You probably saw the signs, the texts, that were always a little shorter than yours, the way they talked about their ex with a little too much energy, going either direction, the way they went quiet when you needed them to go loud, the way the effort was always a little asymmetrical. You saw it, and you talked yourself out of it, because they had so many other good things, and who are you to expect everything? And maybe you're asking for too much, and maybe you just need to give it time. Time doesn't fix asymmetry. Time just shows you what was always true. You have to get better at believing people when they show you who they are early. Not cynically, not with your walls up from the jump, but with your eyes open, with the part of you that actually knows what it needs allowed to speak, without being immediately overruled by the part of you that just wants it to work. The right person is not going to require you to shrink yourself to make the relationship function. The right person is not going to make you wonder consistently where you stand. The right person is not going to be a project you're optimistic about. They're going to be someone who makes the asymmetry hard to find because they're actually trying. That person exists. I genuinely believe that. And I think the reason a lot of us haven't found them yet is not because we're unlovable or broken or too much. It's because we keep confusing potential with reality. We keep loving the idea of someone at the expense of the truth of them. So here's where I land on this. You're always the loser. Yeah, in a specific, limited, outcome-based reading of the word. Sure, you care more, you hurt more, you stay longer, you miss it harder when it's gone. But you're not losing at the thing that actually matters. You're not losing your capacity to feel. You're You're not losing your ability to be present for someone. You're not losing your willingness to be vulnerable even after it's burned you, even though it probably should have made you colder by now, but it didn't. That's not a bug. That is genuinely, without irony, the whole thing. That's the part of a person that makes love feel like love instead of just convenience. You've been calling it a weakness your whole life because it's kept costing you. But it was never the problem. It was always the best thing about you. The world just kept putting it in front of the wrong people. That's a solvable thing. It's a slow, uncomfortable, sometimes heartbreaking thing to solve. But it's solvable. You're not cursed. You're not broken. You're not destined to always be on the losing side of this. You just need to stop handing your rarest quality to people who don't know what to do with it and start giving it to someone who already knows what they have. Will I ever be loved? There's a question some people carry around that they never really say out loud. It doesn't come up in conversations. It's not something you ask your friends. And it's definitely not something you post online. But it sits quietly in the back of your mind. The question is simple. Will I ever be loved? Not liked. Not tolerated. Not someone people talk to when they're bored. Loved. The kind of love where someone chooses you. The kind where they stay. Because if you're being honest with yourself, you've probably watched it happen for everyone else. You see couples walking together, friends getting engaged, people talking about their person like they're the most natural thing in the world. And part of you is happy for them. But another part of you can't help wondering, why has that never happened to me? You've tried before. You've talked to people. You've opened up. You've let yourself believe that maybe this time it could be different. And for a moment, it always feels promising. They laugh at your jokes. They text you first. They tell you they enjoy talking to you. And you start to think maybe this is finally it. Maybe this is the person who's going to stay. But then something always changes. The messages get shorter. The effort starts fading. The energy you once felt from them slowly disappears. Till one day you realize something that hurts more than anything. You cared way more than they did. And after that happens enough times, you stop asking what went wrong with the relationship. You start asking what's wrong with you. You look in the mirror and start picking yourself apart. Maybe I'm not attractive enough. Maybe I'm too quiet. Maybe I'm too emotional. Maybe I'm just not the type of person someone chooses. And the worst part about that feeling is that nobody around you sees it. To everyone else, you seem normal. You go to work. You talk to people. You laugh when you're supposed to. But inside, there's this quiet loneliness that never really leaves. Because wanting to be loved isn't some dramatic fantasy. It's one of the most human things there is. To have someone who looks at you and thinks, I want this person in my life. Not temporarily, not when it's convenient, but for real. And when you've spent years feeling like that hasn't happened for you yet, that's when the doubt starts creeping in. You start wondering if maybe some people are just meant to watch love happen for everyone else and never experience it themselves. After a while, the question doesn't just stay in the back of your mind. It starts showing up everywhere. You'll be scrolling through your phone and see someone you went to school with, posting pictures with their partner, smiling, laughing, looking like they found something real. And you pause for a second, not because you're jealous in a hateful way, but because you can't help thinking, how did they figure it out? How did they find someone who chose them? Because from where you're standing, it almost feels like everyone else received instructions for love that you never got. Some people fall into relationships so easily, they meet someone, they click, and suddenly they're building a life together. Meanwhile, you're still sitting there wondering why every connection you try seems to fade before it ever becomes something real. You replay old conversations in your head, moments where you thought things were going well, the way they used to respond quickly, the way they seemed interested in you, the way they said things that made you believe they actually cared, and then you remember the shift, that slow change where their energy started pulling away, the delayed replies, the canceled plans, the feeling that you were the only one trying to keep things alive, until eventually you stopped hearing from them altogether. And what hurts the most about those moments isn't just losing the person, it's realizing how easily they walked away. Like the connection that meant so much to you, it didn't really mean that much to them. That's the part that sticks with you. Because after enough of those experiences, something inside you starts changing. You become more cautious. You hesitate before getting excited about someone new. You stop letting yourself believe things too quickly. Not because you don't want love, but because disappointment starts feeling predictable, and eventually you find yourself doing something you never used to do before. You start preparing for people to leave. Even when someone new enters your life and things feel good, there's this quiet voice in the back of your mind saying, don't get too attached. It probably won't last. So instead of enjoying the moment, you hold part of yourself back. You protect your feelings. You stay guarded. And the strange thing about that kind of loneliness is that it doesn't always happen when you're physically alone. You can be surrounded by people, talking, laughing, living your life. But deep down, there's still this quiet uncertainty, because the question never really disappears. Late at night, when everything gets quiet, it comes back again. Will someone ever truly love me? Not temporarily, not out of convenience, but the kind of love where someone looks at you and decides you're worth staying for. And when you've spent years feeling like you're still waiting for that moment, it's hard not to start wondering if maybe it was never meant for you at all. The hardest part about carrying that question, will I ever be loved, is that eventually it stops sounding like a question. It starts sounding like an answer. After enough disappointments, enough people leaving, enough almost relationships that never become real, something inside you slowly shifts. You stop expecting love, not dramatically, not in some big moment where you say you're done with relationships forever. It's quieter than that. You just stop hoping the same way you used to. When you meet someone new, you don't let yourself imagine a future with them anymore. You don't let your mind wander into those what-if scenarios, because every time you did that in the past, it eventually ended the same way they left. So now you protect yourself. You convince yourself that you don't really need love like other people do. You focus on work, on hobbies, on building a life that doesn't rely on anyone staying. And on the outside, it actually starts to look like you're doing better. You're more independent. You don't chase people anymore. You don't beg for attention. You don't sit around waiting for someone to text you back. But what most people don't see is the quiet sadness that comes with that kind of independence. Because deep down, you never actually stop wanting love. You just stop believing it would happen. There's a difference, and that difference shows up in the smallest moments. Like when you're walking somewhere alone and you see a couple holding hands, or when your friends start talking about their relationships and the little things their partner does for them, or when you're lying in bed at night and the room is completely silent. That's when the thought slips back in again. What if it never happens for me? What if I'm one of those people who's always the friend, always the listener, always the one who's there for everyone else, but never the person someone chooses? Because when you've spent enough time feeling overlooked, it starts changing the way you see yourself. You begin assuming that if someone better walks into their life, they'll choose them instead of you. That if someone more exciting shows up, you'll be forgotten. So you keep your expectations low. You tell yourself you're fine on your own. But the truth is, there's still a small part of you that wonders what it would feel like to have someone who doesn't hesitate, someone who doesn't disappear when things get complicated, someone who looks at you and doesn't need time to decide. They just know, and maybe the scariest part of all is realizing how badly you still want that, even after everything, even after the doubt, even after convincing yourself you don't need it. That small part of you still hopes that one day someone will walk into your life and prove that all those fears were wrong. But here's something most people don't realize when they ask that question. Will I ever be loved? The problem isn't that you're unlovable. The problem is that when you've been hurt enough times, you start measuring your worth by the people who didn't stay. You start using their choices as proof. Proof that you weren't enough. Proof that you were easy to leave. Proof that maybe love just isn't something meant for you. But those people were never the judges of your value. They were just people who passed through your life. And sometimes people leave not because you lacked something, but because they were never meant to stay long enough to see everything you are. The truth is, love doesn't happen on a schedule. Some people find it early. They meet someone at 18, 20, 22, and it feels like their life just clicked into place. But for a lot of people, it takes longer. Not because they're less worthy, but because the kind of love they're meant to have requires the right person. And the right person isn't someone who hesitates about you. It's not someone who keeps you guessing. It's not someone who makes you question whether you matter. The right person doesn't make you feel like you're asking for too much just by wanting to be chosen. They make it clear, effortlessly. And when that kind of love finally shows up, it doesn't feel like chasing. It doesn't feel like proving yourself. It doesn't feel like begging someone to stay. It feels calm, like something that was always supposed to happen just at the right time. So if you've been sitting with that question for a long time, if you've spent nights wondering whether anyone will ever truly choose you, here's the truth you need to hear. The fact that the wrong people left your life doesn't mean the right person never will enter it. It just means your story hasn't reached that chapter yet. And one day, when someone finally walks into your life and stays without hesitation, you'll realize something that used to be impossible to believe. You were never unlovable. You were just waiting for someone who could actually see you